Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Strategic Risk Management for Project Leaders. Our guest speaker today is Professor Krishnamurthy, Dean, L&T Institute of Project Management and a PMI guest speaker. Professor Krishnamurthy is currently heading as the Dean of the Institute of Project Management established by Larsen & Toubro as an in-house academy for enhancing project management competencies among L&T project personnel. He has been instrumental in establishing this institution as a unique in-house academy for Larsen & Toubro. He holds an MS in Electronics and MBA degrees in addition to a postgraduate diploma in computing. A PhD scholar at the University of Twente in Shed, the Netherlands, his research area includes digital age models for product development, risk in projects, and bidding models for projects. After spending substantial number of years in the electronic industry projects, he consciously moved to academics and has been involved in the field of higher education that is relevant and applicable in real-life industrial project environment. He is a project management evangelist with various published articles in the field of project management. In the project education arena, his areas of focus are project management frameworks, risk, bidding, and project control through tools. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker, Professor Krishnamurthy. Over to you, Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Krishnamurthy here. Okay, this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about risk management, basically strategic risk management for project leaders. Let me get on to my PPT. Okay, can you see the first slide?
Yes, we can see your first slide, Professor Krishnamurthy.
The agenda for the day is agenda for the day is some fundamental concepts, definitions of risk, then project risk management process. I'm going to talk about project risk analysis and management. Talk about risk monitoring and control. I will apply this to a strategic risk index linked bidding model, which can be used in industry, some conclusions and some references. That's what I'm going to do today. Let's get on with the next part of the presentation. The learning that I expect from this presentation is just understanding the difference between strategic and execution risk identification and management techniques, creation of risk index linked bidding models, and towards the end I will give you an idea about what is called risk maturity model for organization, RMM as it is called.
Can you please be a bit loud?
Let's get on with different.
Professor, can you please be a bit loud?
Yeah, can you hear now? Okay.
Yeah, it's fine now.
Risk is basically risk is part of any project. Project leaders who understand this are able to manage their risk, and the ones who are classified as successful project leaders are the ones who understand risk. Typically, I have put a screen there, that's a banana skin, as you can see there. How many of you see risk on this? I'm not too sure. But if you are a risk expert, I can see almost about 15 risks associated with the banana skin. Now that is a kind of thinking process that has to come into a project manager when he sees an event, an issue, or a problem, the risks that come up along with that. If you look at the project management body of knowledge, one of the key areas is, of course, risk management. What is the origin of risk? The origin of risk is uncertainty. Uncertainty exists in the environment. Uncertainty is not quantifiable. What we are trying to do is to try to quantify uncertainty by giving it a kind of an assessment, which is the probability of happening of this uncertainty, and we call it a risk. If you don't do that, it becomes a problem. So problem is an uncertainty which is not foreseen as a risk, and it has come to you today. When you look at project risk, there are three types of risks. What is called inherent risk, the other one is what is called the owner's risk, and the last one is execution risk. Most of us in India, especially those who are in the field of outsourcing or executing contracts as an EPC contractor, we are concerned with the execution risk. There is one element of risk which is induced by the owner himself. It could be the ownership change or a lack of having financial resources. Those kind of issues come with the owner. The inherent risk is inherent to any project. If you are using a new technology, there is an inherent risk. Nobody can escape this. Or if you are executing a project which involves certain specific raw materials which are not available, for example, in a power plant, coal, it's an inherent risk of a power plant. Coal is not available, power plant cannot be executed. So inherent risks exist in almost all the projects. The ratio of this varies depending on the type of project. If you are developing a new product, you are using a new technology, there is always an inherent risk. Two major categories of risk are there, which are from a strategic perspective. One is what is called the preventable risks. These are arising from within the organization. That means the organizations are responsible for inducing these risks in projects. These are typically the execution and the owner's risk. The other one is the strategy risk. This is basically arising out of the risk appetite for the organization. Again, it is linked to the strategic direction of the organization and the ability of the organization to take the inherent risk that exists in any project. How do we get involved with the project depending on the risk in the project? That's a typical 4x4 matrix. There is a kind of a trade-off that you do between risk and the benefit that you derive out of it. Typically, a high-risk project is high benefit for the organization. A low-risk project is a low benefit for the organization. One has to decide based on the kind of risk-taking ability of the organization, where the organization wants to be in this 4x4 matrix. The risk-reward matrix is typically relating to the quality of resource needed. If the reward is high and the risk is high, surely you need high quality of resources. If by the same token, if the reward is low, the risk is also low, you need only low quality of resources. Where do risks come from? Let's understand this. Risk comes from all. It comes from the people involved, the structure, that is the management structure and the systems of the organization, the technology, and the tasks that you are planning to work. Risks are induced by the stakeholders. It could be the employees, the contractors, competitors, financial institutions, regulatory agencies, a whole lot of works around. Everybody induces a risk in any project. I just want to clarify the difference between a risk and a problem, because we have a habit of intermixing the two. Risk is a possibility of something that may occur in the future. It has its origins, as I explained earlier, in uncertainty, and as on today, you have to identify for the future so that you take some actions as on today. Problem is a certainty. It has already happened because you didn't anticipate it earlier and it requires immediate action. If a risk is not identified and managed, surely it will lead to a problem. Factors influencing a typical project risk. Of course, as I said, the uncertainty, it can be a high uncertainty, a low uncertainty. It can be few unknowns or lots of unknowns. As you can see, again, it comes down to a 4x4 matrix. when it is a low uncertainty and few unknowns, that kind of a project requires a process definition. That means the project processes and outcomes are certain. All you have to control is project processes and outcomes. As the uncertainty increases and lots of unknowns come in, you are slowly moving towards understanding what has happened earlier or similar projects. That means the focus shifts to knowledge management. You need to have a knowledge base of similar projects to predict what can possibly go wrong with the project that you are going to handle today. Risk management by itself, having defined risk now, risk management is the art and science of identifying, analyzing, and responding to risk factors throughout the life cycle of a project. Project risk, of course, by definition, we are saying any event that can negatively affect the viability of a project. I must also tell you, English language is a bit funny because we don't really have a right antonym for risk. So risk can be sometimes positive as well. So any project, when you say risk, you have to define the negative risk as well as the positive risk. The positive risks are the opportunities, as you know. The process of risk management. How do we do this? If you look at the risk management process, typically you are starting with planning risk management, identifying the risk, performing qualitative risk analysis, then going on to a quantitative risk analysis and typical risk responses, and finally monitoring and control. The objective is to increase the probability and impact of positive events and decrease the probability and the impact of negative events. The planning process, how to conduct the risk management, that is a planning process. It ensures a degree and type of visibility of risk management for everybody in the organization. It also ensures sufficient resources and also the time that are required for handling the risks. And it should begin immediately as the project is conceived, and it should be completed early during the project planning phase. If you look at risk planning, this is performance versus time. The actual performance, as you can see, could be very much below. You deliver something which is based on your understanding of the expectation of the customer, which is slightly above the actual performance perhaps, and the customer expectation is slightly above. Why I'm showing this slide is to tell you where the risk management comes in. Poor risk management leads to actually customer expectations being totally away from what you have delivered. The actual performance versus what you have delivered is a technical inability, not poor risk management. So risk management is handling the customer expectations at the right time with the right technical inputs. When you look at risks in the beginning of a project, it looks like a Manhattan, like the cricket Manhattans, as you can see. It looks big Manhattans all around right through the number of risks, and they go on decreasing as you go through the time zones in the project, like initiation, planning, implementation, and delivery. That is because your lack of understanding of the project in the initial phases that you have this kind of a number that comes up. Over a period of time, you are understanding the project and the number of risks come down. This is another way of explaining what happens in a typical project life cycle. If you see this, the opportunity that is available, as I explained, risk and opportunity, they are on either side of a coin. The opportunity is very high. Naturally, you assume that there will be a lot of risk in a particular project. That is in the beginning. Then you get the project in. Once it is in, it is going through your concept phase. You start putting money into the project. Slowly, it gets into the development phase. The amount that is put in the project goes on increasing. And you're getting into the implementation phase. You have already put in the money. You have developed halfway through. There is no going back after this. That means the risk now really hits you if you have not done the risk analysis correctly. So the period of highest risk impact is between the implementation and the termination phase of any project. There's no way that you can go back. You have to close the project, and whatever risks have not been anticipated, you have to take it in your stride, get hit, and then close the project. So the process of risk management, what is likely to happen, what can be done, and what are the warning signs, and what are the likely outcomes. When you look at risks in a project, it can be broken down just like we do the work breakdown structure. Typical technical risks, the external risks, the organizational risks, and the project management risks. As you can see there, the technical risks are relating to the requirement, the technology, the complexity, the quality. And the project management risks typically are estimating, planning, and communication. These are the major ones. You can subdivide them as well. The stages of risk management, typically 4 stages: risk identification, analysis of probability and consequences, risk mitigation, control, and documentation. If you look at it as a system, the risk management technique starts off as a system with the input, output, and the tools and techniques. As you can see, the inputs are typically the risk management plan, which you must have, activity cost estimates, activity duration estimates, the scope baseline stakeholder register, cost management plan, schedule management plan, quality management plan, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. Now all of that constitute the input. You use documentation reviews, information gathering techniques, checklist analysis, assumption analysis, diagramming technique, all of that to create what is called a risk register. So the risk register is the starting point of creating the documentation for risk management. There are multiple risk clusters that exist in any project: financial, technical, commercial, and execution. Common types are typically absenteeism, skills not being available, resignation, staff being pulled away, time overruns, and all of that. How do you identify? Typically 4 methods: the brainstorming method, expert opinion, past history, multiple team-based assessments. Generally, once you do this, you can start classifying them based on the probability of occurrence of the event and the consequence. Originally, when they started categorizing this, they started categorizing on a 3x3 matrix. That means, what is the probability of a particular event happening, and what is the consequence of it? You can classify them and put them in these boxes depending on the consequence as well as probability. The one which has got the highest probability and the highest consequence is the one you would attack first in terms of how do I mitigate this particular risk. Now, generally, when this was designed, said that somewhere about up to 0.3 on a scale of 1 would be something like a low category, and between 0.3 and 0.7 would be a medium category situation. Anything above 0.7 would be a high category situation. Just to clarify, of course, the consequence also is converted into a 0 to 1 scale by defining the consequent values. That is, if you're going to lose $1 million, that is equal to 1, and if you're not going to lose anything, that is 0. So that kind of a scale that you can create. It was realized that that kind of a 3-point scale is not so good, it's too broad, so we wanted to redefine it. So generally nowadays people use a 5x5 matrix for classifying risks. I've just put together some probabilities and the consequence factors. That is just a definition. You can keep changing them depending on your organization and the values that you would want. As you can see, the probability scale is anything above 0.75 is called the most likely probability. Anything between 0.75 and up to 0.5 on the lower end is called likely, and 0.25 to 0.5 is occasional, 0.1 to 0.25 is unlikely, and the last one is less than 0.1 is less than 10% chance is about remote. Similarly, on the consequence front on the right, as you can see here, insignificant, minor, significant, major, and catastrophic. So you are classifying the consequences as well. Naturally, the one which is most likely and catastrophic is the one which you would handle first. you could create a kind of a risk management profile for your organization by classifying them. I've just put together, just for your thought process, a template. Like a catastrophic event would be creating maybe perhaps more than 2% of the total project cost variance. You can also say if it is going to hit your schedule by X number of days or weeks, depending on the size of the project, that is catastrophic. Those definitions you define before you start off with the projects. The probability criteria I already explained. As you can see, so I have classified the consequence criteria up to an insignificant level, even up to number of days of delay and the percentage of total cost change. If you are in an industry where human beings are involved, accidents are common, then you can relate it to the loss caused by unsafe practices as well. So that will be the other parameter which will come. You can have templates like loss of human life plus property, accidents causing loss, minor incident, and all kind of things. So you have your definitions change. This is just for you to understand that overall risk factor scoring for a project is multiple parameters of the probability. From your risk breakdown structure, you have individual probabilities, a number of events are N, leading to consequences which are C. As you know, one probability can lead to more than one consequence. That's why M, it is not N again on the right hand side. So M is always more than N. One probability can lead to two consequences. So that's the overall risk factor calculation. For those of you who are familiar with set theory, you will know the minus sign comes because of the intersection of the two events which are happening in the environment. There are so many organizations which do not consider the negative factor. They just take the total probability as well as the consequences. That means the risk is amplified as a higher risk. So the project risk analysis and management typically assumes that the risk management follows a life cycle, and risk management strategy changes over the project life cycle, and it is a synthesized and coherent approach. There are 9 steps. You define, then focus, identify, structure the risk, clarify ownership of the risk, estimate, evaluate, plan, and manage. That's the methodology of risk assessment. There is no business without risks. Project business is with risks in any case. Ultimately, you have to take these risks intelligently and also receive adequate reward. And you have to develop a plan to deal with the unexpected. There are some terms which we must be familiar. One is what is called the uncertainty. As I told you, it is unpredictable outcome which cannot be quantified. Risk is an unfavorable outcome. And priority risk is a risk selected for further analysis. I gave you that 5x5 matrix. So put all the risks in that 5x5 matrix and look at those ones which are on the right hand side, the red area of the assessment. And of course the opportunity, there are some opportunities as well, which is a favorable outcome. And the risk factor, which is typically probability of an event happening and the consequence. There are certain situations, especially in software development, it is very difficult to detect the risk. That means you have to improve the risk factor prediction by probability, consequence, and then multiply it by the difficulty of detection. So the one where it is not difficult, you don't have to consider. The one where it is difficult to consider, the difficulty of detection also will become a factor. We have the risk opportunity response plan. That means when the risk happens, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle the risk? And if there is an opportunity, how are you going to encash the opportunity? Risk trigger, a condition that signals need to carry out preventive or corrective action. That means there is an economic turmoil that is happening. One of the things that is going to hit is the foreign exchange. That means you have already provided for as a risk in your project. The trigger is the economic turmoil, international economic turmoil. So how do you handle that? That is the trigger that you have said. Any economic turmoil between the two countries is a trigger for foreign exchange variation, perhaps. You have defined it like that. Or lack of manpower being deployed to that place because we cannot move people around, you can't get visas, you know, all kind of things. So that's a trigger. the uprising, these kind of triggers can be established if you are working in a multi-country environment. The risk opportunity worksheet, a tool used to capture description, calculation of the risk factor and the plans. And the log is a tool used to keep track of all the project risks and opportunities. That's a kind of a simple sample of a risk opportunity worksheet. The description of the risk, potential consequences and the benefits, the probability of occurrence and the projected cost benefit, the opportunity factor and the response. I have just listed some risks and opportunities. I have just given the probabilities, the cost impact and the sponsor, that means the owner of the risk, who will take action on it. So the project manager is typically responsible for the implementation of the risk management program. He acts as the champion. How? Of course, through his project team of project resources, the functional departments, operations management, legal and risk management department, by, of course, communicating timely in an effective manner with the management team and the project team and the client. Typically, for large projects, the project manager will appoint the sponsor, and he will be the owner of the risk as well as the opportunity. Generally, it will be the subject matter expert who will be the sponsor of the risk. The sponsor, of course, develops, monitors, and controls the risks. Tools, 4 phases, of course. First is identify the risk. It's the most important phase because it relies heavily on experience and insight of the project team. Key output is, of course, risk checklist. What I have done here is to give you a simple WBS and a risk assessment for an automobile. I just used an automobile as an example because we have a heterogeneous audience. So as you can see, I have given the engine there, the fuel, the electrical part, undercarriage, powertrain, brakes, hydraulics, structural. So I have looked at each one of them. I have done a WBS of that, and I'm actually doing a risk breakdown structure for each of those. And the blue ones are the low risk category items. The yellow one are the medium risk category. The red ones are the high risk categories. So one could do this to the assess level of risk. Once the risk is identified, the probability of the risk is approximated as a percentage. That requires, basically it is based on gut feeling. It's advice from the subject matter expert. Expertise, experience learned, corporate lessons learned, past projects handled. The knowledge management comes into play here, industry lessons learned. The next task is to assess the impact amount and cost estimation. Generally, if you want to do a qualitative, you can always say high, medium, low. You can define what is high, what is medium, and what is low. Then, of course, you can go for a quantitative risk analysis as well. There are specialized mathematical models available like Monte Carlo method. I will briefly talk about it, not too much because it is highly mathematical. Just to go back on what we started off, when you do a risk breakdown structure, if you remember, you have all those individual items. You have identified the risk that can possibly happen to individual items, line items, and then you have mitigated them or taken care of them. After doing all of that, ultimately there will be still a residual risk. Now we need to find that residual risk, and that's what we are doing in Monte Carlo simulation. Individually we have mitigated. Finally, for the whole project, we need to find out what is the residual risk that can happen. So, to talk about qualitative risk analysis, typically considers schedule, political situation, environmental factors, staffing, and things like that. We also identify the risk triggers, and we can also do an independent risk analysis by experts, and we can do an independent risk audit by an audit committee. And then we prepare a risk response plan, which is typically any one of the 4. It could be avoiding the risk, it could be mitigating the risk, it is accepting or reducing the risk. It is a continuous process. It's not that one time you do it and you forget about it. So if you have done it before bidding, then at periodic intervals you are reviewing and redoing the risk analysis. Why? Because some of the old risks identified would have just gone away, and new risks would have come up. So the new risks have to be identified. And also the probability which you have estimated earlier could have changed. Maybe the probabilities would have changed totally, and some of the risks would have become major as on today, what was identified as minor. Ultimately, the objective is to make a kind of a structured risk management process to lead to good decisions, and we can communicate them effectively. Tools, well, multiple tools, qualitative tools. It is just probability and impact. It's an ordinal rating to denote order. Typical, I showed you that screen earlier in terms of metrics. You can also give the probability factor and express it in terms of probability. So that's a typical 10 weeks delay and things like that. It's easy to administer. Naturally, everybody understands. Only thing is you need definitions. It is difficult to enforce unless you have some definition. That's why I gave you the definition. What is meant by low? What is meant by major? What is meant by catastrophic? All those rules and processes have to be defined first. So the qualitative risk analysis process is to prioritize. The inputs are the risk register that you have created already, a risk management plan, scope statement, the organizational process, and the assets. And the risk register updates come up because of the analysis. The tools and techniques, risk probability and impact assessment, impact metrics, the quality assessment, categorization, and risk urgency and expert judgment. These are the tools used. So the risk management plan, basically budgets, activities, risk management, risk categories, all these are defined in the risk management plan. Typically, the analysis is to make sure that the risks that you have defined will occur. If at all it happens, then what is going to be your strategy for handling the risk? Okay, let me now get into the quantitative. Quantitative is a bit time consuming. It requires estimation. There is one disadvantage with quantitative. It is misleading in a way that the numbers give you precision and specificity. This is a thought process people have. But you must remember that we have started our assessment based on a subjective judgment of probability. So there is a subjectivity which is actually leading to some quantitative estimations. So the errors in the subjectivity will lead to errors in your final estimation. So it's only a guideline. It is not that it is precise or specific. Typically, of course, it is difficult if the team resists working with numbers. And it is substantially more valuable in response strategies and reserves. So just for you to know the difference, you have the qualitative and the quantitative analysis. As I said, it is easy to explain and not more costly to produce, simple calculation. Quantitative, of course, is numbers, deals with schedule, it's costly and uses computers. There are some tools available. Later I will show you what are the tools available, commercial tools for calculation, the quantitative calculation. You can also do a mixture. You can use qualitative for probability and quantitative for impact. So that way you are better off in assessing. You can also use qualitative for some risks and quantitative for some other risks. So what is the information that you need? Basically project scope and WBS. That is the first part of risk analysis. Then of course the risk management plan, that also you need. Then of course the updated risk register which you would have made, and a detailed cost estimate. Naturally, of course, the schedule which leads to the time estimations in any case. The inputs are all of those, and finally what you are doing is by using the tools, quantitative risk analysis and modeling techniques, expert judgment, all of that, you are creating an output which is a risk register update. The organizational process assets are information on prior, similar completed projects. This is very important. That's why I said knowledge management is very important in risk analysis. Studies of similar projects by risk specialists and risk databases that may be available from industry or proprietary sources. Very, very important. And of course, a risk management plan and risk register. So, the tools and techniques, you can do an interviewing technique, probability distribution analysis, sensitivity analysis, expected monetary value analysis, and modeling and simulation. Interviewing technique, sensitivity, interviewing is actually interviewing the people who are really involved in projects. Sensitivity is what happens, what if situation, that is sensitivity analysis. And expert judgment is Delphi method. That means you are asking multiple set of group of people, asking them to debate over and come with their assessment of the situation. And finally, throwing this open among them to come out with a consensus opinion on this solution. And of course, the expected monetary value analysis. That means, you have multiple options available. If you take A, what is the output of that? And if you take B, what is the output of that, which is giving you more monetary value. That's what you are doing. Decision tree analysis. Later I'll show you one slide. I'm not going to go into the theory of it, but decision tree is typically multiple options, multiple probabilities, finding out which one is going to give you the best payoff. That's what you are doing in this decision tree. And probability distribution is depending on probability and the consequences, how it is getting distributed and which one to attack first. Monte Carlo simulation is for the residual risk analysis. Ultimately, just to give you an idea, the estimation given by estimators, whether it is time or cost, these are typical random numbers. They are not continuous numbers, they are absolutely random. And we have to find out based on, let's say for example, you have got a project, you have asked 5 experts, what time are you going to take, how much money and how much time. Let's say they're saying, okay, we are going to spend about $1 million and 3 months to complete this project. If you take that estimates from 5 different people, there will be 5 different values coming out of these 5 different people. And these values are absolutely random. And the objective is now to find the right value. How do you find out the right value of the random numbers? That means we need to find the convergence value for these random numbers. The only way you can find a convergence value for these random numbers is Monte Carlo simulation. It's like running a gamble, you are running a roulette and deciding where the ball is going to sit on a roulette. So all these estimates are like that. Estimates for time and cost given by estimators are all random. Finally, you are taking all these estimates and putting it on a random number table after understanding the probability distribution and saying, okay, this is 80% possible in terms of cost and about 90% possible in terms of time. That means you need to provide for 20% contingency for the cost and 10% contingency for the time. That's what Monte Carlo tells you ultimately. So utility, of course, in terms of decision, what is the utility of a particular decision for a particular project, and that utility part. Let's quickly move over. I explained all this, expected monetary value, and Monte Carlo also explained. Ultimately, I want all of you to get this feeling that if the project scope is well defined, then there is a possibility of realistically achieving the projections given by all the people. If the scope is not well defined, the probability of achieving the cost estimates are poor. And a very poorly defined scope leads you to a very broad estimation. Actually, what I have given below is how do you handle such projects? That is a kind of a clue. That is, when you have a very kind of defined scope where the cost can be defined very well, then I would even take that project on a firm fixed price. Whereas when the scope is not so well defined, there are some inadequacies in the scope, that means estimates will not be close to reality, then I would take it on a cost plus fixed fee basis. And when the scope is very poorly defined, I would always take it cost plus fixed. That means cost plus fixed cost or whatever, or percentage fee. So you recover your cost and you get your percentage fee. So that's a kind of a contract that you would write for such risks. That's decision tree. I just want to show you a decision tree. That's it. There are two options available, multiple branches, and as you can see, there are multiple probabilities, 60% chance, a 40% chance, a 60%, 40%, and you fold it back and figure out which one to take. That's the idea of a decision tree. A comparison between the two, decision tree and Monte Carlo. Ultimately, Monte Carlo is highly quantitative, more precise, and gives you values for your residual risk for contingency. There are professional software available. As I told you earlier, you have Portmaster, which reads from MS Project and Primavera, then performs simulation, then at risk from Palisade. It actually links to Microsoft Projects and does all this analysis for you. Then, of course, Risky Project. Risky Project has the advantage that it has got what I call as laundry list of risks. If you define the domain like automotive industry, then it will list about 100 or 200 risks that are typical for an automotive industry. So you could pick from there. So it's pretty easy to use that tool. Of course, there are open source software as well, which has got simulation capabilities. And the Primavera can be, it can be linked to P6, Monte Carlo simulation software available, which can be linked to P6 as well. Well, typically the software can model thousands of activities in less than a minute. So even if you have listed hundreds of risks in there and you want to simulate it, it is possible. It can do the schedule, uncertainty on activity duration, and also resource usage. All of that can be done, and probability that an activity will occur. All of that can be done. In the case of cost as well, you can do uncertainty on activity cost, uncertainty on resource cost, and of course probabilistic cash flow. That also can be done in this software. So the risk response now, coming to risk response. So you have the risk register, the risk management plan. You have the tools and techniques, which are basically strategies for negative risks, strategies for positive risks, that is opportunities, contingent response activities, and expert judgment. All of that are tools. Finally, giving rise to an output, which is again risk register update, risk related contract documents. That's why I showed you one slide where you can have a specific contract where you can take care of the risk, and project management updates and project document updates. Okay, so the risk register refers to the identified risks, looks at the causes, a list of potential responses, and creating a watch list for you for all types of risks, including the low priority risks. And risk management plan include roles and responsibilities, analysis, definitions, and whatever. Risk responses, typically strategies for threats: avoid, of course, eliminate the threat by eliminating the cause, mitigate, reduce the probability or impact. You can transfer it, deflect, allocate. That means you transfer it through contractual means, or transfer it to a subcontractor if you are contracting to somebody else part of the job. Otherwise, finally you accept it, because some other risks, in any case, you will have to accept it. That falls in your strategic decision. Yes, you are going to take this risk yourself. The strategies for opportunities, of course, you exploit, enhance, and of course share. That means you share it with your contracted with the owner. All kind of things you can do. Share it with the third party. Finally, accept. So the risk register updates. Typically, or at any point in time, all the identified risks, their definitions, area of the project that is affected, and the causes and how they may affect the project. That is listed in the risk register update. Okay. And the output from the outputs perform qualitative analysis as well as quantitative analysis. Contingency plans are also created. Triggers also call for execution of the contingency plan. The strategies are avoiding, eliminate the source of risk, mitigating, reducing the impact, like by insurance, if available, share the risk with the client or vendor, accept, of course it cannot be avoided, accept it, but provide a contingency funding for accepting it, reduce or transfer, like simple example in a car, as you know, you have installation of seat belt or airbags is to reduce the accident, stabilization if it is civil work, you know, and you are doing near the hillside, so all kind of things. So I'm just giving some common examples there just for you to understand. Risk and opportunity, either side of a coin. For strategies, that means exploit the opportunity, avoid the risk, share, reduce, enhance, then mitigate, ignore, accept. That's a kind of combination that you get between risks and opportunities. Typically, decision making on risk strategy will be transferring risk to an insurance company sometimes, getting into risky projects depending on the risk appetite of the company, sharing risk through JV or partnering, and reducing risk by having good internal controls. Okay. So there is monitoring and control. The objective is to implement the agreed responses and review their effectiveness. So typically you have to initiate it, you have to continuously update the risk opportunity worksheet, risk opportunity log sheet, right from bidding stage onwards, hold weekly, monthly, quarterly review meetings. That is why you do a continuous basis of risk analysis. And every project review meeting must include current status of risk to the project. Set up a system to regularly monitor changes in probability and impact of high risk as the project progresses. So that's a monitoring and control part, risk assessment, risk audits, variance and trend analysis, technical performance, reserve analysis, status meetings. Those are the tools and techniques. Finally, again, updating your risk register, the organizational process assets, change requests, project management plan updates, and document updates. Let me quickly run through this because I need to get going on the model that I talked about. So I'm just going to skip a couple of slides. This is a risk register update I have explained earlier. I'm going to talk about a strategic application of risk now, risk index linked bidding model. So we understood that the risk by itself is important in a project, risk analysis is important, risk management plan is important. Now, how do we translate that into a strategic bidding process? See, anybody wants to complete the project as early as possible, of course, within the estimated time and cost. I mean, that's the objective of the owner, project owner, as well as, of course, the contractor. Naturally, everybody wants to complete it within budget. Ideally, of course, less than the original budget. And typically, as per the original scope, preferably, especially when it's a development project, incorporating all the current updates in technology, even though not specified in scope statement. This is what everybody looks for in any project. Now, how can we arrive at an optimum combination of risk and project completion objectives? That's the question. So we realize that risk is part and parcel of any project. So we should appreciate the inherent, that is, strategic risks in any project, irrespective of who is executing the project. So strategic risk analysis is important for us from the following perspectives. One is the project viability perspective. Typically, the project owner is concerned with this seriously. And of course, selection of the execution partner. Typically, when you look at the probability distribution of cost step by stages in any project, as you can see here in the feasibility study stage, if you look at it, it is at the bottom of the torpedo. There is a wide variation in the estimation, the maximum and the minimum and the most likely, it goes like that. And when it gets into a design phase, slowly it is getting truncated And when it comes to the tendering phase, still it is truncated, and as execution progresses, it gets almost towards the tip of the torpedo. So this is what is called the torpedo effect in project cost estimations. The actual cost towards the end will typically be towards most likely that you would have estimated. It should be somewhere there if you have done your estimation right. That is at the time of closure and claim settlement. Now, when you do a comprehensive risk analysis, you have to do it in 3 phases. That is 3 areas. One is the inherent project risk, risk specific to the owner, and execution specific risk. That means IPR, the OSR, and the ESR. After the risk analysis, create risk indices in each of the following categories. That is inherent project risk, risk specific to the owner, and execution risk. Now, when we do a bidding process, what we have to do here is, in the pre-bid screening phase, once you have shortlisted the possible bidders for any project, ask the bidders to go through the risk evaluation by them in the same areas that we have already done, perhaps if we are the owners. Ask them not to submit the price bid, ask them to submit their assessment of the risk in all the areas, risk matching exercise of the risks that we have already defined. That means they will give you inherent project risk assessed by them, risk specific to the owner, execution risk. Match those indices submitted by them with that you have already assessed. That means you have pre-done the assessment yourself, and now they have bid with only the risk indices. Their estimate should fall within plus minus 2 sigma, that is 2 standard deviation of your assessment. Then only they have understood the risk. So in the second phase, you select only those bidders who have submitted within plus minus 2 sigma of what you have assessed. Then ask them to submit again the final bid with prices. By this way, at that time, the second time, the risk index should be plus minus 1 sigma of your estimation. This will compel for realistic provision of risks, segregate the contracts and risks distinctly, focus on bidders will be on the project deliverables rather than getting project based on L1. Both owners and contractors would jointly work towards risk mitigation, thereby achieving acceptable project closure. Project will be subjected to lesser ambiguities and interpretation, better dispute resolution and settlement, and overall, of course, stakeholder satisfaction and transparency. I talked about project leadership and risk understanding, and also said risk maturity models. I'm going to get into that now. This is called the RMM levels. Risk management maturity model. Level 1 is where you have initial approach, you have an ad hoc arrangement for risk assessment based on individual capabilities in the organization. That is called level 1. Then you have the specialist silos. It is typically reactive, department-specific risk management, non-collaborative. That means multiple departments don't talk to each other. That is actually a level 2 organization. Then you have the ERM framework. That means enterprise resource management, enterprise-wide risk management framework. It is, you have some structured policies and procedures, organizational level awareness exists, project lifecycle risk assessment and risk management exists, and qualitative risk assessment exists. If these things are there, then you are a level 3 company, level 3 organization. Then ERM optimized, the enterprise-wide risk management optimized. You are proactive, that means you are doing it before. Then integration with business process, benchmarking you have done, and risk quantification you have done. That is in level 4. The ultimate level, CMM, just like CMM level 5, the level 5 in RMM is risk intelligent organization. The opportunity exploitation happens based on risk as well as opportunity. You are able to take a high risk, high opportunity situation. Then risk portfolio management, integration, risk integration with strategy, and risk reward relationship exists. So just a recap for you to know what we talked about: prioritization, analyzing, risk response plan, implement and manage a plan, scope risk, cost risk, schedule risk, performance risk, management risk, commercial risk. Risk can be mitigated, avoided, transferred, accepted. Strategic risk identification management is the cornerstone of any project success. All projects involve risk. There is nothing like a zero risk project. If it is so, it is not worth pursuing. Organizations which better understand the nature of these risks and manage them more effectively, and if they do that, they not only avoid unforeseen disasters but also work with tighter margins and less contingency, freeing resources for other endeavors and seizing opportunities for advantageous investment which might otherwise be rejected as too risky. This is a fundamental question everybody asks. Is there a way that we can avoid risk? Well, we have considered every potential risk except the risk of avoiding all risk. Those are the references. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks for the insightful presentation, Mr. Krishnamurthy. Let's quickly take up the questions now. Please read out the questions from your chat pane and their answers so that all our users may listen to the commendable insights. Over to you.
All right. Okay, how? Okay, I have several questions here. Let me just. Okay, there is one question which is asked by Mr. Shankar, I guess, yes, Mr. Shankar from Capgemini. Could you please elaborate when a risk assessment will be performed during the course of the project and how SME knowledge to be leveraged for a state-of-the-art kind of project? Okay. Can the number of risks grow over time also? If so, what does it imply? And why do we need cost management? Oh, that's a long one. Management plan and schedule management plan for identifying this. Okay, let me give you a general answer for that question, and which will answer most of the other questions as well. First of all, risk management is a continuous process. So it is not when, it is always. When you start the project, before the start of the project, you do a risk assessment. And when you start getting into execution phase, you are reviewing it. You decide in the risk management plan when you will do the review. It could be a monthly, quarterly, half-yearly, depending on the size and the length of the project. Subject matter expert is to give information about the risk that can possibly happen. If we are doing a new product development, most likely most of the risks are not known to anybody. The reason is it is new product development. So invariably you will have to depend on similar project executed, and some of the risk learnings from there will have to be brought in. The subject matter expert is always asked questions whenever a risk review is made in terms of his opinion on what he thinks of the possible risk now, whether it has changed or otherwise. So I think his role is also important. That's a question. Okay, there is another question here, how the risk management is managed in the agile model. There are changes that are inevitable and very often. First of all, changes are very common in agile model. That is why it's called agile, because you are agile all the time and you are keeping on reviewing. What we are doing is we are doing a project risk assessment, not the model risk assessment. Please understand it. So when you take on a project, if we are going to do it in agile mode, that is okay. That is a mode of conducting the project. So first you do the risk assessment of the project in terms of, as I said, inherent risk, owner's risk, and execution risk. If you are able to differentiate the three, then you can automatically do a review of it at periodic intervals. The same as the agile model. So your total project is 3 months. You start doing the review every week. That's it. Every week you do a risk review. That's the answer. Okay, let's see whether I have another question there. Okay. Well, I have a question here. Well, when senior management personnel themselves are involved or part of a risk to the company, what steps should be triggered on an immediate basis? Okay. I'm not, this again is from Shankar. Okay. What I feel is the question means that the senior management personnel are introducing a risk in the project. That's exactly what you are saying, I suppose. In that case, there is a need for a risk audit by an outside person and bring it to the management, the risks that are introduced by the senior management personnel. So that is why I said there is a need for risk audit. Just like we do regular financial audit, there is a risk audit at periodic intervals. You have to do, other than the people who are involved in risk assessment, it will be an independent team which will assess the risks and also the mitigation that has been planned by the team and review it and suggest recommendation. That's a way to handle this. So in most of the organizations, they have business unit risk group. Then you have an independent corporate risk assessment cell which comes and periodically reviews the assessment done by the business unit groups. Okay, what's the next one? Okay. On slide 39, how to find probability of a certain risk to occur. Oh, okay, that's pretty easy actually. It depends on the risk. Probability is a situation which is, as I said, how do you assess the probability? You ask a group of people. Now, for example, I can give you a common example. We have a situation now, the dollar changing, okay? So there is a risk happening. In terms of if you have quoted in dollars, you might be getting more money or less money depending on where the rate is going. There is a risk of foreign exchange. That means you have to ask some specialists in terms of what is the trend that is going to happen for this currency during the period of the project. It may be 6 months, 1 year, whatever. So they're saying, there is a probability, there is a chance, there is a 10% chance of the dollar dropping down to 50. There is a 50% chance of it going up to 56. The chance even comes from the experts. So the probability is given by the experts. That is one way. The other one is your own assessment of similar situation which has happened elsewhere. So the past data. So probability is based on past data, subject matter experts, as on today opinions. All of that lead to a probability estimation. Okay. What's the next one? Yeah, opportunity. Okay, opportunities are, for example, if perhaps if I were to contract today, and I have assessed my contract, it is in dollars, and I have assessed the dollar at 50 rupees and contracted. I would think that there is an opportunity for me now to expand the scope of the contract because I am getting more money for a dollar, right? At a marginal cost with the same customer. So I would look for an additional business from him, perhaps at maybe at 52 rupees even calculation, you will get an addition. There is an opportunity because the dollar has changed for you. So you would ask for an additional business from him and do it at a lower price to him that he would have got otherwise. There's an opportunity there. So you are converting a risk into an opportunity. Same situation if you are handling, for example, if you are in real estate business, all of a sudden the municipality has decided to build a road by the side of the real estate. That means the prices are going to go up. Perhaps if it is possible, then the apartments that you are building can be sold at a higher price now that the environment is becoming better for you. So opportunities, those are the opportunities which you have to business-wise encash. Okay, now we have questions. There are several questions. I'm trying to pick the right ones now so that everybody gets a common answer. Okay, there we go. What's the next one? Let's get the next one. Yeah, Okay, there is one question which is very generic. Can improper assessment of the business case be considered as an inherent risk of the project? No, 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 no. Wait a minute. That is actually just like owner's risk. It is an induced risk by the assessment team. So it is an owner's risk, I would say. Inherent risk is something which does not go away whether you handle the project or somebody else handles the project. For example, I gave you this very simple example as on today now. If you're going to set up a power plant, there is an inherent risk today, that is coal. Without having coal, there is no way that risk will go away. That means it is an inherent risk. Whether I do the project or you do the project, somebody else does the project, that's an inherent risk. Similarly, if I'm going to develop a new product out of a technology which is not performance proven, especially in the software industry, there is an inherent risk that is brought in by the technology. Whether I do it or you do it, somebody else does it, that risk exists. So this is actually a risk induced by the project assessment team. So if you have if you have not assessed your consultant, I assume that you are giving a consultant the business analysis. That means there is a risk induced by the business analyst. So if you are sure they are going to induce this risk, surely it is possible. Okay. Yeah, positive risk. I gave you that impact. As I said, there are 2-3 things here. The question is impact on a project. As a project manager, how can we make use of the opportunities arising out of positive risk? I answered it. I want to answer it further to say this. There may be complementary risks. That is, some risks may be negative, some risks may be positive. Perhaps they might neutralize in the project. So that is also possible. That's one way. And if your positive risks are very good, perhaps they may overtake most of the negative risk as well. So this is something which you have to keep reviewing. It is possible to do it. How to find, okay, how to convert threats, that also answered that. Okay, there are so many here. Okay. How can a project manager do an effective risk plan if the sponsor has not shared the macro information, financial data, market intelligence? My question to you is, why do you have to worry about all this data? If you are given the project, why don't you do the risk analysis by yourself in the first place? Okay, come up with a risk register that you think is right at this point with the information that you have. Then go back to the sponsor and tell him, listen, these are my assessments, and if these things come true, then I may not be able to execute the project as expected. These are the cost overruns and the time overruns. That will trigger a thought process in the sponsor to share his risk plan. But even if it doesn't share a risk plan, you have made it upfront known to him the risks, surely you will be able to raise additional claims because of your assessment. So from your perspective, it is better to do a risk plan right in the beginning and share it with what is shareable, of course, with the sponsor, so that you can raise additional claims as and when required. That's the right answer for it. Okay. Typically, a project manager is expected to execute, communicate, and conclude what has been assigned to him or her. Rest of the strategic info close to the sponsor's chest. Also, please elaborate difference to risk and the issue. Okay, okay. This question is asked in all interviews I had to face. Interview, okay. First of all, it doesn't matter what you are doing, whether you are an executor, whether you are a planner, or you are a conceiver. At every stage, there is risk. It is for you to assess the risk so that your plan is very firm. If you are going to execute a plan, the execution is firm within the known risks. So it doesn't really matter whether someone else has done or why should I do it, I've been asked to execute. Well, when you know the risk, you will be able to handle it better. If you don't have a plan for risk, you will start executing without realizing the risk, and halfway through you might have to stop the project because the risks become too voluminous, too kind of mountainous that you cannot handle. So ideally, it doesn't matter what others are doing. As a project manager, it is your duty to do a risk assessment and keep your team informed, and also the sponsor informed, the apparent risk that you will face in the project. Okay, what's the next one? Yeah. Oh, there is one question which is very interesting. Can the number of risks grow over time? If so, what does it imply? First of all, number of risks cannot grow over time. This is if you have done your risk analysis correctly. If you remember the slide I showed you, it is called a risk Manhattan. It starts at a higher level and goes down. If the risks have grown over a period of time, then one thing for sure, your original risk assessment was not correct. Absolutely not correct. Second, there may be some projects, it is an exceptional situation, that due to environmental factors, suddenly some new risks have come. Even though the numbers may not be great, the risk consequences of these risks could be enormous. For example, this happens in the case of kind of real estate as well as highway projects and all. Land acquisition becomes a big issue. You might have been reading the newspapers, whatever. Suddenly, people don't give away the land required. Originally, they would have agreed, and suddenly you are not able to acquire the land. So it has become a major issue. But these are all one-off situations. In general, if you have assessed it well ahead of time, number of risks should go down, and very limited number of risks will happen. But those risks, you will have to handle them carefully. Okay, any other question?
Well, we have a lot of questions, Professor Krishnamurthy, but we won't be able to take all of them up due to the shortage of time.
All of
So,
them, yeah, I can.
thank you so much for your session on strategic risk management for project leaders. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to
Thank you very
thank
much.
all our participants for making this webinar a success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Thank you for your support.
Okay. Okay. Hello. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Yeah, I think so. There are so many questions. He said there are about 500 questions, but he has asked.